Armando, I want to ask you about real estate and trends in real estate and where it might be going. But can you explain infill briefly to us?
Infill, by and large, depends on the city that you're in. So if you're talking about infill here in South Florida, you're talking about areas that have been developed, where you're going in and tearing a property down, as we're doing in downtown Doral. So you're improving an existing property rather than going out to a place that has no infrastructure. I've done both. If you are going to do an industrial park, it is not possible to do an industrial park as an infill, because you're talking about, in the case of the Beacons, 200 plus acres. In the case of Beacon Lakes, 400 acres. So obviously you can't do that as an infill. But most everything else that we do, my preference is to do infill. The building that you're interviewing me in, 355, that is my kind of, that's the projects that I prefer to develop. So one thing is to do industrial, another thing is to do an office building, where my preference is not only to do them infill, but to do them in main and main, like Alhambra and Lejeune. If you're talking about residential, infill would be downtown Doral, certainly. Everything that's been developed in Brickell or in the core would be infill development. But my definition of infill would be, the classic would be downtown Doral, where there was an existing office park with 1,200,000 feet of office space, and we are tearing it down to build an infill project that will have a beneficial impact in the peak traffic, because downtown Doral at 8 o'clock in the morning you had 1,200,000 feet of mostly government offices coming to work at 8 o'clock and leaving at 5. So downtown Doral, by balancing the uses, office with residential, with retail, it evens out the traffic. So the peak hour traffic is being reduced. We're doing it in a place that has existing infrastructure and utilizing existing infrastructure. To me, that would be the best example of an infill project.
Is infill something we now need throughout America, or is it city by city, region by region?
I think you can say that in general, but it really applies more to cities like a place like Lake County, where the infrastructure is stretched. Remember, when you go out there, not an industrial park, again, I think it's very different because of the size of it. It is an employment base, and the traffic patterns are counter to. So when we go in and build Beacon Lakes, when people are going to work in downtown or in Coral Gables, people are coming to Beacon Lakes. So it also doesn't have an impact on schools. So unlike a residential project that would require a lot of water, sewer, but it also has an impact in schools. So you really are stretching out the infrastructure in a very significant way. So in a place like Lake County, where you have the Everglades to the west, by definition this place is a classic place where infill makes all the sense in the world.
Let's move up a county to Broward County, where you're involved in a project called Montera. That's a residential project. Is that infill?
Yeah, Montera is very much infill. Montera was a farm for many, many years. Many developers tried to buy Montera, and they were unable to buy it. There was a farmer that never wanted to sell. I believe he passed away, and the family sold the parcel. It was bought by a company called TUSA, Technical Atlantic. It was in NASDAQ, symbol TOUSA. They bought it and paid a very large sum on the height of the market, and they zoned it for a very, very, very high intensity. Because the price was so high, they needed a lot of units to justify the price. So, you know what happened to the market. The company itself went bankrupt, so this was one of the assets of the company. So we bought it. A lot of people have been looking You know, I sold in 2007. If you had told me that I'd be back on the market buying a parcel this size, I would have told you not likely. But the distress, the destruction of value on the marketplace has been so large that it's very hard to sit on the sideline and ignore what was happening. So, you know, when I sold in 2007, I told my wife, that I wasn't going to do anything else, that I was going to relax, and she's very smart, and she looked at me and she only had one word. She said, "Sure." So I sold because it was obvious that the values that assets were selling for were not sustainable. So I didn't understand what was happening on the market. I wasn't smart enough to foresee the debacle that followed. But what I was seeing, it was lots of institutions giving a lot of money, lending a lot of money, oftentimes to people who had never developed anything. And there was irrational competition. There was irrational competition for buying of assets. So I thought, my gut, it felt that it was time to sell. So I was fortunate that we sold when we did. But so when you see the destruction that followed, again, I wasn't smart enough to have predicted that. But the destruction of value has been so Montera, to answer your question, is everybody was looking at buying distress, but nobody really has been able to. There's a lot of commercial assets bottled up that the banks haven't been willing to. They're in denial about the values. They're in denial if the bank is kind of okay. They're in denial if the government takes them over, because the government is not letting them liquidate these assets. So most of this distress that you hear about is about condominium, and I wouldn't have bought any one of I wouldn't have bought any one of those projects almost at any amount of money. It just wasn't my kind of. So land was a niche that most people ignore, and we found this space that we understood well, because I issued a lot of those bonds on my projects. All of them performed, but they're community development bonds. They are issued for infrastructure. So we bought the bonds from Montera at a discount when the bond and the real estate markets were kind of a perfect storm. So we bought the bonds at a distressed price, them acquire the first mortgage, and them acquire the title. So that is the space that I concentrated on. So we did Montera, and we did another one in Jacksonville. And we dabbled in a number of other issues in case we could acquire the whole. But Montera is one of a kind. It had very, very high density, as I mentioned to you before. So a lot of that density was when the markets were irrational about, these town centers and live, work above. And so we took that density and reduced the density to do mostly single family. So if you read some of what's been written about Montero, Cooper City loves what we've done, because, and the neighbors who fought the density but lost, they love what we're doing in two ways. A, you reduce the density significantly, it's more compatible. The density that had been envisioned there, not only was it irrational, it didn't belong there. It didn't, the surrounding neighborhoods, so it was a high-rise kind of, everything was wrong about it, in my opinion. But so we brought it back to basics, mostly single families. The city likes it because they are getting the tax base, which the place is doing very well, since the models haven't yet opened. They open next week, and we have sold over 80 homes. So the place was the right place. It is infill. Everything, there's a lot of development to the west of it, so it's kind of in the middle of South Broward. And because we bought the land right, and because the price of construction, subcontractors are very hungry, the price that we're able to sell a home for is about the same price of what foreclosures and short sales and resales have gone through in those zip codes. So if you can buy a brand new home, quality from a name that my partner Jim Carr has built homes in South Florida for a long, long time. He's a very reputable builder. And our brand in terms of development and infrastructure and quality is also known. So if you can buy a home at a price per foot that is about equal to what sales for the last year have gone for, and most of those sales are foreclosures and short sales. If you buy a foreclosure, you buy assist. If you're lucky, the home has been neglected. Neglected, I mean, if you're lucky. If you're neglected, I mean the bank hasn't had the air conditioning on, so you don't know if you got mildew, the carpets, your wife is likely to want to come in and want her, appliances and cabinets and so forth. If you're not lucky, it's been trashed. Right? So if you can buy a brand new home at about that price per foot, it's a no-brainer. So the first week that we opened, I was at the sales center, and one of the things that got my attention is that there was no haggling. We haven't done any. We wouldn't have done it because we were selling at a very attractive price. But I was surprised at the reaction of the buyers. So in a few hours, I realized that the reason that it was not taking place, haggling, or is that these buyers had been looking for a year. They had looked at a lot of foreclosures, they had looked at a lot of short sales, so they were very well educated about what they were looking for and what the price should be. So when they saw a brand new home at this price, it was a compelling case. So I don't think you will see on a single family these prices again in South Florida. And by the way, while there's been a lot of inventory of very excessive inventories of condos and a fair amount of inventory of single family, there's no inventory of new single family. So this was, for us, it was the right space at the right time, and it's a very compelling case to a buyer that's looking in that marketplace.